Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Onion Soup. And today I'd like to welcome to the show Dr. Morton. How are you doing today, Dr. Bintarah?
I am doing very well. Good to see you this morning, Dexter.
Good seeing you as well. So, your PhD is in educational theory and curriculum.
So, my PhD from Louisiana State University is in curriculum and instruction with a focus in education, elementary education, and curriculum theory.
Interesting, interesting. First, tell us a little bit about that and what that is exactly.
That's a good question. Somebody joked with me when I said I was going to get a doctorate. They said, "Oh, you get that PhD piled higher and deeper." And I was like, "What does that mean?" But my focus is in how do we design curriculum for our students. Um, so let's go back a little bit. I had the choice. My background is in education leadership. I was a campus principal doing things in that area, and I thought that there was a gap in my knowledge when it came to how to really function as a school instructional leader at a campus. I had the knowledge to be an administrator, which means to just take care of things, make sure things roll smoothly. And I was learning on the fly, really, how to do a lot of things that came to curriculum. And so I chose not to get a doctorate in leadership, but to get it in curriculum and instruction. Basically, how are we going to design? How do we pay attention to what's being designed for our students to be able to learn? And then how do we make sure that happens in a classroom in the long run? How do we instruct what we've designed along the way? And so I focused in elementary education because that was the area that I'd worked in for a period of time. And that gave me some basic pieces of how to do foundational pieces, learning like how do you look at hidden curriculums? How do you look at who designs the curriculum, who has the power to design the curriculum, and then what they do to impose those things on them. Does curriculum become a part of acculturation, or does it become a part of how do we do to work on a pluralist society? And so I focus on those areas. And then curriculum theory, the last part of it goes into how do we theorize potential solutions for us to do so. And so that's kind of what curriculum theory is for me as I look at it, my doctorate in curriculum instruction with a focus in elementary education and curriculum theory.
Interesting, interesting. So, as an educator and an individual who actually develops curriculums for others, what would you say to the reason on why we don't talk about spirituality and metaphysics in the classroom?
I think if I can be truly candid with you, that's my goal today, is we don't want to. We acknowledge, not we as a being, but we have been taught through so many ways that our spirituality is a hoax, and that is hokey or woo woo and all these kinds of things that are ideally negative in our society. And if we are kept absent from those pieces of who we are, then we're able to be enslaved, if I can,
Mm,
through the educational systems, through these things that are there. We think about all this, many of the spiritual practices that we see around us. People don't do, and not because they are wrong, but because we've been told they're wrong.
mm,
Like you're told that we say it all the time in some religious sects that, oh, we see a baby and like, oh, that baby's been here before because they're acting so deeply in, they come in with the maturity as a kid that's uncanny, unnatural. And me saying that, oh, that baby's been here before is a note or a nod to reincarnation.
mm,
However, through our religious sects and through our ideas, we don't believe in reincarnation.
right.
And so it's the underlying pieces of the spirituality are there. I see that in education all the time. If I really connect to the spirituality that's there. But let me go back a little bit further though. What is the true purpose of education?
Mm,
And if we're paying attention to what education is about and what it really does, we assume that education is to make sure that we are full-bodied people. But if you really look at the missions of many of the schools and things around, it's to help people be citizens in whatever country or whatever environment they're
mhm,
in. And as I was reading through and learning yesterday, citizen is basically a city slave. And so, if that's what education is, then we don't want people in the educational realm who are learning to learn about their spiritual beings and learn that their oneness of who they are, and that the educational system is designed to help you be a part of a system and not to be individual.
Hmm. Interesting. So that kind of puts me in mind of this old saying of if you want to conquer a people, first get rid of all the intellectuals. And this is what ultimately happened with Socrates and his students, because back then they were teaching these practices and metaphysics and everything in the school and their universities, the original universities. And after they killed not just Socrates, it was actually more so after Aristotle that they really stopped teaching these or stopped allowing it to be taught in the school system. And then you start seeing a enslavement of the mentality of others. So
Mm-hmm.
when we start looking at education from a global perspective, it does seem to me that let's say other cultures, other parts of the world, they still talk about their spiritual beliefs, background, heritage, ancestry, and it still comes up in school. So why is Western society so different?
I think Western society um, not demonizes spirituality. They found a way, or yeah, I would say they found a way to make things happen in a control system. Um, when I was in Chile, we talked some about. I spent some time there in mid 20 teens, and watching their school systems and watching the different types of schools and things that were there in Concepcion. It was a beautiful experience because I was able to contrast what I had seen in K-12 education in the US and then see what I'm seeing there. And they had some similarities, but there's a gap. There's a phrase, I think it's we've come through, but basically they are together, and watching some of the spiritual practices in the festivals that they practice at school, like having a fire pit going around and talking
Mm,
about how they connect to the ancestral beings and bodies that are there. If we connect to the ancestral bodies and beings that are here, then we have to dispel the myth and the lies about who are our ancestors and who are the ancestral beings of this continent, of this land,
mm,
in this part of the country. And I don't think we're ready to do so. I don't think we're ready to justify the enslavement, the genocide, the things that we did to have this country, the United States, that are put in place. And all these things are in the history books that you can find. They don't even hide this part. They just talk about, they change who the people are along the way. And
yes.
so connecting to that land and connecting to the spiritual beings and spiritual bodies of who are here, I don't think we're ready to have that conversation.
Mm.
Not at least on the main front, because it changes what our focus is in education.
Wow. While you were talking, the first thing that came to mind, I know somebody's going to bring this up, is well, we have the separation of church and state. So, what is the separation of church and state, and is that really a true separation that we have in our country?
So the assumption is that the state, when I understand the separation of church and state, that the state cannot identify a specific church or religion or belief system as a whole. So we are not a Christian country. We are not a Buddhist country or a Muslim country. So we don't have that piece. That is a separation of church and state, which means that I cannot enact laws, not say that because we do that. I cannot say that this is a specific state, almost like our language in this country. We are an English speaking country, but not by law, by practice. And so we are not a Christian country by law, but by practice. And then so that's that part of church and state. But if you really think about it, there's no separation. If you separate you from who you are, then are you who you are? We bring those belief systems into place. We look at the abortion policies across our country right now. That's not based on a thing. It's based on a religious belief.
Mm,
And the religious belief of, thou shalt not kill. If I chose to move away from that religious set of laws, then what does that mean for abortion? Many of our laws are based on a Judeo-Christianity
mm,
idea of what law should be. They
mm,
don't tap into, and they're watered down so much that they're not even connecting to the universal laws at all.
mm,
So is there a separation of church and state? As long as we have people running the state, there's not a separation,
mm.
unless those people are themselves separated from church or whatever their belief system is.
Interesting. You mentioned the universal laws. So say in such as in higher education, I understand why you can't do this in earlier education, such as elementary school, middle, high school. But in higher education, what would someone need to do as an educator if they want to start uh, teaching these practices, these ideas, these concepts in their classrooms?
I would imagine that you would have to just simply create the class. at the same time, for me, so my current role is as the university professor in education leadership. So I'm an associate professor in education leadership, and I teach things about education leadership. I can teach anything I want to as long as it's related to education leadership.
Mm,
That's where my protections go away. That's where my tenure is connected to. If I'm doing things that are in line with the curriculum that's designed for me, so I can create classes about education leadership. I can go on the fringes of where it is as long as it's related to the education leadership along the way. So if
mm,
I have a content in that area that I'm interested in teaching about the spirituality, then I need to be teaching in an area that it is close, that it's related to. So I can create the course about it along the way. Um, in our doctoral program here, we can create courses. I'm actually finishing up changing up one of the courses that we've changed now, and we took it away from a dissertation to a culminating project. So it changes the way it ends, and the university is like, yes, that works. Let's do it
mm,
because we are the experts on the content, but I'm not going to be an expert on content about spirituality if that's not the area that I'm working in. Now, if I were hired as a spirituality teacher or as a teacher of religions or a teacher of beliefs, I could do it some in the
mhm,
theories
mhm,
as I'm talking about different theories along the way. Like, are these belief systems, and talk about those belief systems? But that's not the focus of the program that I'm a part of at the present moment.
mm. So, as you teach individuals to become leaders in your leadership programs, do you think that it would be more of a positive impact, or have you seen any impacts of people of different backgrounds trying to integrate their, um, let's say, cultural beliefs into their practices as leaders?
So I would say for me, I believe that diversity is our strength, and diversity of ideas, diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of whatever area that's there. And actually, when I
Mm,
talk about diversity, I rarely define it as one specific thing because it's each place. I want to prepare leaders to be transformational in their area. I
mm,
want them to be research informed, and I want them to be focused on the practice of what they're doing. And so, in doing that, my research focuses on in that realm focuses on what leaders do to meet the needs of diverse populations. And I don't define what diverse populations is because each leader that comes in is going to work in a different population.
mm,
And so, I want you to come in and be able to take the information that you've gathered from me, from the text that we read, from the things that we challenge, and I want you to leave thinking about things in ways that you had not thought about them before.
mm,
And doing that involves everybody in the room being an expert in their own specific area and allowing me to simply facilitate the conversation to help you to challenge the way you're thinking. My
mm,
goal is to help you stop being the roadblock in the mirror that prevents you from engaging with students in academic excellence in their area simply because they are different from you. And
mm,
so for me, I value the idea of looking at your own pieces, bringing your own experiences, bringing your own ideas, but not allowing those ideas to prevent you from engaging with people whose ideas are different from yours.
Interesting. That sounds really challenging to navigate. I mean, you have a lot of different people, I imagine, from really just different parts of the world coming to you, and you have to control the conversation. So, how has that influenced or impacted your own personal beliefs and ideology?
So it gives me an opportunity to challenge my beliefs and ideology. I think that's one of the things that we should do as we grow. If I were to believe the same thing I believed when I was 10, when I was 20, when I was 30, when I was 40 even, then what kind of growth has that been? And so I want to continue to challenge and interrogate everything that's there. I was taught as a kid that you hear, you ask questions about things. Now you ask questions respectfully, but you ask questions about what's going on. I learned later that I should ask questions, and I don't believe when you tell me the answer. My wife tells me frequently, "You don't believe fat meat greasy." I was like, "You're right. I don't believe it's greasy. I'm going to check it for myself."
Mm,
And I want everybody to be able to challenge those things because that's how we get through the structures, the hegemonic structures that are set up in place to keep people in power, keep ideas in power, and to keep somebody. If somebody's in power, it means somebody's not in power. And so
mm,
to challenge those structures that are around us, I want to challenge. I want to bring in ideas that are there. When I'm hosting meetings, when I'm having classes, when I'm doing things, I will look around the class and see who's not communicating, who's not participating in the conversation, and invite them into the conversation.
mm,
I may even give them a pre-slugged question about, hey, I haven't heard you talk about such and such in the morning. What are your thoughts about this? And giving and setting, so you talked about the challenge of doing that thing in the class. We set expectations for what the classroom environment looks like, what
mm,
the engagement looks like, talking about how it's professional, how we value each other's ideas, how we come with our ideas. We come and be present in this environment together at one time. How
mm,
all of us is stronger than one of us, or all of us are smarter than one of us. How how we are enjoying a silence. So if we're working on something silently, that we don't distract the other people around. So we set ground rules for how these things happen, and then we walk about how do we engage those bodies that are there. Ground rules, even including if you are hearing your voice too much in this conversation, then be quiet, let somebody else hear. Let
Mm,
somebody else's voice speak up. We set
mm.
a pattern that you write down your ideas before you start to share them out loud, so that you have a chance to think through and process what my ideas are. And students don't ask the question, oh, they took my answer, or I have nothing to say. No, we set up a pattern of what happens. And that's the practice that we do throughout our program, or throughout the courses that I teach. Actually,
Ooh,
not just the courses, everything that I do it that way.
wow. I have a really interesting question, but before we do, we're going to take a quick word from our sponsors. Hello, everyone. So, before we left, you were talking about really critical thinking and the importance of critical thinking. But one thing you kind of touched on is getting people to kind of understand the idea that they might be talking too much or kind of have their thoughts laid out and controlling the conversation. So, how do you direct someone or how do you teach self awareness to someone?
Um, I think you, how do you teach self awareness? One of the things we have to give people opportunities to not be self aware.
Mm. What do you
And you
mean?
put them in environment. You put people in environments that challenges your awareness that's there. I may say in a classroom, okay, I haven't heard from everybody in the classroom. Or if I really need to, I will say, okay, I've heard. If you've already said something in the class for the first half of class, I'd like you to take a seat back for a moment, and let's hear people we haven't heard from before. We haven't heard voices from this people, from certain people around the room, and call people out. Hey, if you haven't heard, if you haven't spoken, do so. But also setting up activities that require you to say something for a few moments and get everybody engaged. And so that helps us be more aware that, oh, wait, maybe I was talking too much in the first part of class.
Mm,
If you don't get it, then we may sit down and talk a little bit later on, because I don't have a problem with sitting with you after class and saying, hey, I heard you have some really good points in class. I want you to be mindful to give, as a leader, to give opportunities for others around you to have their voice be heard in the conversation.
mm,
And I honestly, I love to talk. So
mm,
I have to challenge myself at different times. It's like, okay, let me be mindful that there's other people in the room who have a conversation, because I don't. So one of the things for me, as I'm self-awareness, I recognize that as a, as a Bentara, I don't know everything.
mm,
And so I'm going to talk about the areas that I have my expertise in. And then the other areas, I'm going to give you my thoughts about it. But if I haven't had much of thoughts about it, I'm going to be quiet about it. And so teaching others how to do the same thing. I don't have to have my opinion be shared. I don't have to be right in every situation that's there. One of the things I'm challenging teachers to do, or future leaders to be able to do, is to decide, do I need to be right, or do I need the students to be able to get what they need to get?
mm.
And that part of self-awareness, I think, is there, because I can be right all day long and the students don't want to learn from me anymore, because I've been bullying them into understanding that I'm right, as opposed to just simply saying, "Hey, let's make a decision about what we're going to do." And if my student focuses on students, then it doesn't really matter what I do. And that's how we get that. We talked about the rope, or I mentioned the roadblock in the mirror before. We put ourselves out of the way when we put our students first. And so, helping them to change that and focusing every chance we get on students helps us to really focus on getting ourselves out of the way and being more aware of what myself is doing to impact students along the way.
Interesting, interesting. So I kind of want to switch gears a little bit because there's something I want to touch on, and I really want to touch on from a educational perspective, but I also know that you have a background in science. So when we look at the nature of reality, how would you, I guess, discuss and teach the nature of reality from a educational and professional perspective?
So if I think about what reality is, um, reality in some forms, from my perspective, can be a social construct. It's what we believe is there. If I go back to Descartes and I think, therefore I am ideas, we think, therefore we are in a simple place. But challenging what reality is for me, um, the critical thinking
mm,
and the challenging what's around you. So I come from a post-structuralist idea. My framework is I see a structure and I wonder who's left out of that structure.
mm,
And so I encourage people to think about things from the same. There is a right and wrong, but who determines what's right and who determines what's wrong?
mm,
And so for me, it is how do I teach people to really think about what's going on around you, what your reality is, and understand that other people have different realities. So I look at race in our country right now, or I look at genderism in our country right now. I look at all these things that people are like, but that's wrong. You're doing that. But who decided that it was wrong?
mm,
And what right do I have as my being to impose my belief system on you and having people think about reality in that manner? And they think about what nature is and where we began. All these ideas can be a part of our belief system, but if we're really paying attention, we don't really know.
mm,
We have a way of understanding it and grasping it, but if I were to look at it scientifically, we don't. We have some ideas, we have
mm,
some theories, we don't really know.
mm,
And being able to not understand, being able to grapple with the idea that I don't know something, I think is a challenge for us. And so we're seeking to know it, but through the research, or through the scientific methods, through the scientific processes, scientific breakthroughs, we don't have the technology to get it all.
yeah. Interesting. So you mentioned, ah, man, just lost my thought. But, you mentioned basically being able to define your own morality is really what you're getting at. So what is the importance of one redefining your belief system? Because I think that a lot of us are grown up in a belief structure, brought up in a specific belief structure, and then we never really go back to question it and look at it. So, what are the importance of questioning, redefining and questioning your belief system as well as your own morality?
I think we should challenge each other to challenge our belief systems. I grew up in a belief system um, that believed that enslaving people and destroying families was appropriate.
Mm,
That's the belief system that I was reared in. And as I grew older and started to challenge those ways of thinking, I was like, this doesn't make sense to me. If I am truly to espouse what love is, and why am I killing people? If I'm truly to espouse these things, and why is that there? But I wouldn't have been able to have those conversations if I had stayed in my home environment.
mm,
Um, I think it's important that we take time away from where we are grown. I look at this in many societies. You'll see people that are reared at home by wealthy people, all people around the world, reared at home, early on, and then they send them off into the field to go learn something different, to challenge
mm,
their ways of thinking. And getting my doctorate, I was told as a young academic, get a couple degrees from this first institution, but don't get any more degrees from here. Go somewhere else to get another degree. So
mm,
you have the pollination of ideas and things that are around. So you're not stagnant in your idea. And so I encourage people to do that on a regular basis, to move around, travel, go see, go learn from other places, so that when you're thinking about challenging who you are, it's not based off of this one idea of where I am and who's around me. I wrote in one of my papers, um, just describing how the cultural inability of me. I am a specific culture and idea, and I challenge people to really discuss where I was born, the people I grew up with and was around, that was not a part of my control at the time.
mm,
And so when I moved to a different state, different city, different country, different places along the way, those ideas are still a part of my upbringing. If I were a tree planted, the soil that I grew up in as a tree is still the soil.
mm,
Whatever's there, whether it be good, bad, ugly, whoever defines those things are still there and they're still a part of me. They've nurtured me throughout my life. When I move or get that plant picked up and put into a different soil, then I'm beginning to absorb the other soils in that new place. And those soils then began to nurture my body and nurture my soul, nurture my mind. And I have to now contrast. Well, hey, I had something that was, um, I didn't have a lot of water as a kid, if I use that example for a plant.
mm,
And so now I'm in a place that has an abundance of water. I start growing things I didn't realize I could grow because I have the resources to do so. I
mm,
was in a place that didn't have as much sunlight. Now I'm in a place that has different sunlight. And I'm like, oh, wait, this is growing differently. And so we challenge ourselves to think about how do we interrogate those belief systems and how they stand up in places where we are with people who don't believe the same way we do,
Mm,
who can challenge it, who believe differently. And back to that diversity piece of it, if I want people to challenge it, I think there's a value in challenging who we are,
mm,
at least because, I mean, you work out. If I don't lift enough weights today to push my muscles to where they're a little sore, to a little
mm,
bit there. If I don't read enough today to push my knowledge to where it's like, hey, it's challenging me there, to call the zone of proximal development. If I don't get past that +1 to get a little bit further in, where it's not too hard for me to do, but it's just enough for me to say, you know, I can get this, then how am I growing? I mean, I'm pushing a rock, I'm pushing a rock, I'm pushing a rock, and it's building muscle. By the time I finish pushing the rock's actually moving up the hill. Where in the beginning I couldn't move it. And I think that we have to do that in life of challenging each other to think about who we are, where we are, to better ourselves along the way, and putting ourselves in rooms where people are, if you want to say, more intelligent, who simply think. You
mm.
know, I've heard the phrase people say, great minds think alike. And I was like, no, they don't. They don't think alike. Great minds think,
Yeah.
period. You know, but if we are not in a room where we have thinkers around us, then we're sitting there doing the same thing over and over again. And we're stuck in a rut.
Mm.
And a rut is simply a grave.
Wow. I love that. And I love the idea and concept of viewing yourself as a tree and or any plant, any flowering, fruiting plant. And the more nutrients and different types of nutrients you give that, the more ripe of the fruit you're able to bear. So if that fruit is your spirit and your knowledge, then how ripe and how rich and how sweet do you want that to be? You know, and I agree with the whole idea of great minds thinking alike. No, I don't want to be the you don't want to be the smartest person in the room. You know, you want to surround yourself with people of different backgrounds, very diverse, and be able to ask them questions. Because if you're not learning, how are you growing? But that's pretty much all the time we have for today. Do you have anything you want to leave the audience before we go?
Wow. I'm just excited for the opportunity to share some of these ideas this morning. I think one of the things for me is how do we let me encourage people to challenge who they are, to not be stagnant. When you have a belief system that's been fed, given, learned along the way, to continue to interrogate it. Don't. It is a belief system, and beliefs change
Mm,
until we get to a place where we begin to know certain things that are there. As we're learning who we are spiritually and knowing that, hey, this ain't right. And if it's not right, ask questions. And if you're not getting the answers that are responding to your soul, to your being, then ask different people,
mm.
and find a surrounding of places that you can be there. So that's what I got.
I love that. I love that. You know, when the student is ready, the teacher will come. All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in, and thank you, Dr. Benteroff, for coming on the show today. Have a great one.